Episode 17 of The Wealth Show with Equity Kings. Welcome to The Wealth Show with Equity Kings. My name is Dumisha Ramodisa, and today I want to talk about income inequality, specifically economic disparities amongst certain groups and so on and so forth. So before I get into the topic at hand, just want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year's, because this will be the last episode of 2021. So going into the topic, right, what do we think about when we talk about income inequality, right? We always hear the headlines, the white people earn 3 times more than black people. Okay, fine. And so on and so forth, like the gender pay gap. For every $1 a man makes, a woman makes 70 cents, right? Because these are the headlines we are accustomed to. These are the headlines we always hear from CNBC, Business Live, Newsroom Africa, all these mainstream outlets. So I want to get into that and try to debunk what they're trying to say, because these kind of ideas just give you the headline and they don't actually explain why these disparities exist amongst these certain groups. So let's talk about income disparities amongst black and white people, right? So you look at income disparities among black and white people and okay, this has to be racism, right? Okay, this has to be. If a black person is making, if a white person is earning twice as much as a black person, surely that has to be racism, and it can't be. There's nothing else to justify it. So let's think about this carefully, right? So if I have a business, right? Let's say I have a McDonald's franchise. To be specific, a white man and a black man, right? These two people come to me and ask for the job, right? Same experience, right? But when I do the calculations, it seems as if this black guy can actually make me more money, right? And let's say I happen to be a white person, right? But I can see that, okay, this black dude can actually make more money for me. And so the white guy is demanding, let's say, 50 Rand an hour. So sorry for the American listeners, but we'll just stick with these currencies, right? So the white guy is asking for 50 Rand an hour, and the black guy is asking for 45 Rand an hour, right? The black guy is asking for less, right? So obviously, and let's just consider the fact that I am a racist person. Like, I don't like black people. I'm a white guy. I'm a white supremacist. I do not like black people at all. What am I going to do? Am I going to hire the white dude and waste 5 Rand, right, and take a 5 Rand loss? Or am I going to swallow my pride and hire the black dude because I could make so much money from hiring the black guy? Obviously, I'm going to choose the latter instead of the former, right? So why is this important? Because with income inequality, right, they'll just look at the gap and they'll say, okay, this gap, just like the female men and women gap, right? They'll just look at it and say, okay, this must be bad because this must mean that the employer is sexist. This must mean that the employer is racist. Whereas that's not true when you think about it. Yes, although some employers happen to be racist, but that's not the whole story, right? It is the exception, not the rule. And we can put this to the test by looking at the income disparities between women and men, right? So women earn 70 cents for every $1 a man makes. But men work 42 hours on average and women work 37 hours on average. So let's think about this. When you sign a contract for work, right, you're working based on your hours, right? You're compensated based on your hours, not based on what you're producing. Unlike a McDonald's worker, right? They are getting paid some of them are getting paid based on the hours that they work, but some people are getting paid based on what they produce, right? But usually you're getting paid based on the hours that you put in. So if men are putting 42 hours and women are only putting 37 hours, surely the more hours you put into work, the more you get paid. It's common sense, right? And so if you can, I don't know if you could do the math, but 37 hours to 42 hours is a huge gap. Like, think about that. 42 hours a week from 37 hours a week is a lot. So that has to sort of explain the gap that exists between men and women. I am constantly listening to music every single day, 24/7, and the one place that I trust the most is Apple Music. The benefits of using Apple Music is that you can listen to over 75 million songs ad-free with zero commercials, plus get unlimited downloads to your library and listen anywhere without Wi-Fi or using data. There's no commitment and you can cancel anytime. They have a 3-month special for free, so you can listen to Apple Music for 3 full months for free, and then you can choose whether to pay or not. And it's extremely affordable. So click the link in the description to sign up and enjoy listening to quality music for free. So what are you waiting for? And of course, one of the ways you know that this argument is stupid, the argument that, because men and women have a gender pay gap, how you know that the gender pay gap story is BS, is you have to ask yourself this question. So in a capitalistic society, right, where businessmen are out for profit, let's think about this clearly. If in a capitalist society where businessmen are after profit, why, if a female salary was deliberately lower than a male salary because of sexism, why on earth would employers hire men? Why hire men? Right? If women's labor is so cheap, why would you hire men in the first place? Because obviously, if you hire a woman only, you make a huge profit. I mean, you make a gigantic profit if it's deliberately low because of sexism, right? If society is so sexist that they're willing to pay women less than men just because they're women, why not hire women only? Right? So you have to answer the question, why is that the case? Because there are economic reasons for this. There are economic and cultural reasons behind this pay gap. And I'll get into them in a second. So one of the cultural aspects of the gender pay gap is most women, or not, I wouldn't say most women, but some women are mothers, right? And because you're a mother, you don't work as much as you would had you not been a mother, right? Because you have to take time off to take care of your baby. You have to do a lot of things. Like, think about it. Government laws regarding maternity leave. I think is that what it is? Maternity or paternity leave? I don't know how the terms are different. I think paternity has to do with the father and maternity is the mother. So with all these leaves for pregnant women, right? If in an employment contract, right, this guy as the employer knows that this woman is going to take months of work, obviously you have to compensate the employer for the time lost by your salary being at a lower rate. So how do we know this, right? If you compare the gender pay gap between non-married men and non-married women, there is no gap at all. You can literally go do your own research. I'll put the links in the description. There's no gap. I think women earn 99.97 cents for every dollar a man makes. So there's really no gap there between non-married women and non-married men, right? But when you compare the gap between married men and married women, you get a completely different story. I mean, the gap is extremely huge. And so it's huge not because of sexism, although I'm not discounting the fact that sexism doesn't exist. It does exist, but it is the outlier. It is the exception, not the rule, right? So when you look at married men and married women, obviously it makes sense. You think about, okay, married women tend to have children, right? When you get married, obviously the first thing you want to do is build a family. Of course, not every married family or married couple ends up having children, but majority of them end up having children, or some of them can't, but that's not the point, right? So married women have children, right? A lot of them have children, and so you have to take time off, or you have to settle for an employment agreement that favors being able to be a full-time mother at the same time going to work, so that you can be more flexible between those two roles that you have. Remember, when you're a mother, you don't just have one job right now. Now you have two jobs. You have your normal job and you have the job of raising your child. So obviously that's going to have some effect on the gender pay gap, right? And so how we also know that this gender pay gap story is BS is by looking at Canada's data, right? I think it's from the Labor Department in Canada. If you look at Canada's Labor Department in 1971, the gender pay gap amongst university professors, right? In fact, if you look at it, the ratio between men and women was 107. What does this mean, right? If it's 100, it means they're all making the same, right? But if it's 107, the ratio between men and women, that means that women are making 7% more than what men make. So when you think about that, if women were getting paid more than men, why wasn't there any outrage about gender pay gap against men in those times? And remember, this is 1971, in a time where apparently women are being, in a time where feminism rose up, like 1960s, 1970s. Okay, this time is very, you can think of this time as a time where, things were really bad for women, right? And women weren't really working. So why were some women in some certain industries getting paid more than men, right? And so when you think about it, if the gender pay gap is a thing, right, then why is it that women were getting paid more than men in certain industries, right? And so should the conclusion be that women were sexist against men? Of course not. There are political and economical and cultural reasons for this that have nothing to do with sexism, right? As I said again, for the third time, I'll repeat it again. Sexism is the exception, not the rule. So moving on, right? So let's think about this. Disparities amongst certain groups. The main argument people use is, okay, this because there's a disparity between black and white, or because there's a disparity between men and women, or because there's a disparity between Africans and Europeans. This has to do with racism, colonization, and of course, how you know that story is nonsense is because when people think about disparities, right, they just think that disparities happen for a lazy excuse, a lazy reason, without even doing the analysis, without even looking at the facts. No facts have been given to us why these gender gaps exist, or these gender pay gaps exist. I'm right now, as I'm talking, I'm spitting those facts. I'll say I'm spitting those facts, but I don't know. I think that sounds unprofessional. But yes, I did provide the facts. But when you look at disparities amongst, for let's say, Eastern Europeans and Western Europeans, which is something very interesting, and I think you guys will be delighted to hear about. I mean, this is extremely interesting, and I wrote it on my status a couple of days ago, if I'm not mistaken. But I also posted it on my Instagram. You guys should follow my Instagram. And so, okay, I acknowledge that white people earn twice as much as black people. Fine, I acknowledge it, but what I did acknowledge as well is that the income gap between Western Europeans and Eastern Europeans is 5 times larger than the income gap between blacks and whites. Not just in South Africa, in the US. In fact, in the US, when you compare it to Western and Eastern Europe, I mean, it's far worse. It's far larger. The gap is far larger. In fact, when you look at the numbers, right, I think the average African American in the United States earns about $30,000 per annum, and the average white American in the United States earns about 57,000. So let's round it off to 60,000. You see, so 2 times the white person, the average white person earns twice the average of a black person. So the black person earns 30,000 a year in America, the average black person. So, but if you look at Eastern Europeans, the average Eastern European earns only $9,000 per annum. Imagine that, $9,000 per annum, which is to say it's safe to assume that Eastern Europeans have a worse income than black Americans, or African Americans to be more specific, right? So this kind of doesn't make sense when you think about it. The income gap amongst the same race, because Western and Eastern Europeans, I mean, it's maybe different ethnicities, but same race. I mean, they all white, right? Maybe some of them are not white, but they all white, right? It's Europe, right? Europe, white, European. So if an income gap is so large amongst people of the same race, Can you now say that Western Europe is racist against Eastern Europe? What's the excuse now? Well, I have a good reason for that, and one of the reasons is geography. And this is something that people never ever talk about when they talk about disparities amongst incomes or disparities amongst the economies amongst certain groups. Is they never mention geography, right? So I'll just tell you something very important that contributes to the income gap between Europeans, Western Europeans, not just the income gap, but lifestyle, right? And quality of life, standard of living, right? So let's think about geography. Eastern Europe has a lot of waterways, which is to say that they have navigable rivers, right? So one of the important things about this is that these navigable rivers, they actually reach out into the open sea. So from the open sea, these rivers connect from the open sea to inland, which means that if you join a river inland in Western Europe, a lot of their rivers go out into the open sea. It's not constrained by some plateau or something like that. It just flows right into the open sea, which is to say that it is easier to do international trade, and you can have a lot of harbors on the coast because you can then ship those goods inland through these Western European rivers, right? So Eastern Europe, their rivers, not a lot of their rivers are navigable. In fact, not a lot of their rivers actually open out into the ocean. They do not. Most of their rivers stay inland, which means that if you're gonna conduct commerce or trade, it's very likely that you're gonna conduct commerce and trade inland, and you're not going to do it internationally because their rivers are not navigable and they do not open into the open sea, which is one of the problems that also impact economic growth. And therefore, if it impacts economic growth, obviously Western Europeans are going to get paid more than Eastern Europeans, and they're going to have a better quality of life because they can do more international trade, more than the Eastern Europeans. But again, one of the interesting things about these rivers is that in East Europe, or in Western Europe rather, during winter, right, or after winter, their rivers and their harbors melt quicker than in Eastern Europe, which is to say that in Eastern Europe, even after winter, it takes longer for their ships, or not their ships rather, their harbors and their rivers to melt. So they're still frozen, while Eastern Europe's rivers are now, they're no longer frozen. I mean, winter's over, it's no longer frozen, but the lag time, there's a huge delta between the lag time when you talk about Eastern and Western Europe. And this is primarily because of the warming effects of Gulf streams on Western Europe. So geography speaking, Western Europe by nature, this is just God right here. This is just God creating nature. By nature, Western Europe has an advantage in terms of geography than Eastern Europe. And in fact, one of the reasons why Africa is poor, and people don't actually talk about this, and this goes back to geography, one of the problems with Africa is that, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, is that their rivers are not navigable. What does navigable mean? If you can literally look at this from Stats SA, right? This is Stats SA, South African statistic, the government's statistic agency, right? You can just look it up. So according to Stats SA, it says that African rivers are not navigable. In South Africa, 89% of rivers are foothill streams. What does this mean, right? 89%, the majority of South African, I'm talking about South Africa alone, 89% of South African rivers are foothill streams, which is to say that you can't have a fleet of ships, right? It's not a waterway. 89% of our rivers are not waterways, which means that ships cannot deliver goods and service, or not services, goods. They can't deliver goods onto rivers because you can't move a huge freight ship. You can't move a huge ship on South Africa's rivers because they are foothill streams, right? Which is to say they're very shallow, right? Whereas in Western Europe and in other places in the world which experience great economic advantages because of geography, their rivers are navigable in the sense that they are not shallow, but they are way more deeper than in Africa, right? And so South Africa in particular, 89% of rivers are foothill streams. So therefore, obviously that's going to have an impact on economic growth, because it is just another problem of nature. It is just nature that Europe has a better advantage than Africa in terms of the economy, not because of colonization or anything. This is just one point, right? I haven't even mentioned other factors, but geography is very important because no one can change geography. Only God can change geography. So if nature itself is messing up Africa's economic growth in particular, if it's caused by natural effects, right, then that has to beg the question, why are people making these excuses, these lazy excuses, as if everything has to do with colonization, racism, and all these things, whereas there's actual geographical reasons for these disparities in incomes between Africans and Europeans, for example. So something is also very interesting, right? Because people talk about income disparities and they say income disparities exist because of racism, as I said, racism, sexism, and everything. And that's the only reason why income disparities exist. So let's go back to the male and female income disparity, right? So with males and females, right, this is something very important, and I actually found a way to interpret that in the sense that I could connect it to males and females. This is an interesting statistic. Taller people also have higher average earnings. For both men and women, the relationship is striking. A 1% inch increase in height is associated on average with a 1.4% to 2.9% increase in weekly earnings, and a 1% to 2.3% increase in average hourly earnings. This is from Forbes, Mark Travers, right? Very, very good economist. So basically he noticed the difference between height, and he said that the taller you are, the more money you make, which is actually true. When you think about it, most CEOs happen to be tall people, but that's just anecdotal. The evidence is clear that tall people make more money than short people on average. Not to say all tall people make more money than short people. That's not what I'm saying, because people might misinterpret what I'm saying. What I am saying is that on average, taller people make more money than shorter people. And so think about this, right? In South Africa, the average male height is 167 centimeters. Sorry, 187. No. South African men are not that tall, by the way. 167 centimeters is the average height for South African men, which means South African men are extremely short. But for women, the average height of a female, and I think you guys know where I'm going with this, the average female height is 158 centimeters. So think about this. Men are on average 9 centimeters, or rounded off to 10 centimeters taller than women. And if the taller you are, the more money you make, that should suggest that this has a hand in the income disparity between males and females. Because if males are taller than females on average, that should suggest to us that obviously there's going to be a disparity in incomes between men and women that have nothing to do with sexism. So let's think about this very carefully. So there are a lot of economic factors that influence income disparities, and the reason why I wanted to talk about this in particular is because of people who are telling the government that equal pay for equal work. I mean, that is complete rubbish, and I'll explain why, right? Let's think about what an equal pay for equal work does. Let's assume in these feminist minds, right, because these are the people that are pushing these ideologies without a speck of evidence given or asked for. No one even asked for the evidence. Everyone just accepts, oh, there's a gender pay gap and therefore it has to be sexism. No, nothing else. Conclusion, end of story, close book. Now let's fight against this and create an equal pay for equal work law, right? Okay, so let's say you have an equal pay for equal work law. How will that work, right? So if you're forcing employers to pay men and women the same, despite the economic implications of that, right, which I just spoke about, right? I spoke about women giving birth, women with children, the fact that women don't work enough as much hours as men. There's a number of indicators that can explain these disparities, right? But going back to my point, right? So the government would then force businessmen to pay men and women the same, men and women who do the same job, right? The same job, to get paid the same, right? So what would this do? Let's just assume that every employer is sexist, because this whole thing happens to be because of sexism, right? So let's just assume that's the case. These employers are sexist. What would this do? This would eliminate the need for these sexist employers to hire women in the first place. Because if you're going to force an employer to hire a woman the same amount as men, even though he has a reason why he's doing that, which has nothing to do with sexism, what you end up doing is you give him a reason to actually be sexist by law, which is to say that if he's not going to pay the woman the same as the man, why hire the woman at all? So what happens is less women get hired in the workforce. That's what the law would do. That's what a law like equal pay for equal work would do. It would incentivize employers not to hire women, because you put a premium over their head. You put a premium over the price of their labor, right? It's an artificial premium, remember, because that premium doesn't reflect the market value of her labor. It just reflects the socially acceptable value of her labor, right? It doesn't account for what she's really worth. It just accounts for what is socially acceptable. So when you think about this, and I'm not trying to attack women or anything, I'm just giving you the facts, right? I'm giving you the empirical evidence. You can come up with your own conclusions, but the facts are the facts. It doesn't matter whether you believe in feminism or not, or it doesn't matter. I could be a feminist for all I know, and the facts remain the facts. It doesn't change the fact, and it doesn't change the fact that if the government had to do something like that, these would be the outcomes, right? And so people are very shocking, right? These kind of people are the type of people that talk about equality of outcomes. Now they've branded it as the word equity, right? Equity and diversity, right? We should be more diverse. This workforce, okay, they look at a company like, oh, what's that company again? Activision. You know Activision. Activision is a gaming company. They make Call of Duty, if I'm not mistaken. They make Call of Duty. I play Call of Duty. So Activision is the developer of Call of Duty. So recently, this year, 2021, Activision was, by these feminists, they were striking because Activision had only 25% of their workforce were women. Only 25% of Activision's workers were women. And so something is wrong here in the eyes of these social justice advocates, right? This is something wrong. And 25% women, it should be 50%. I mean, we should have diversity, right? At the same time, we should have equal outcomes, equity. That's what it is. Equality of outcome, not just equality of opportunity, equality of outcome. That's what equity is. Okay, so women must be equally represented in Activision, in conjunction with the male population, right? So women should be equally represented. So there should be 50% men, 50% women, right? So they don't even ask why Activision has so little women in the workforce. Maybe it's because most developers happen to be men. If you look at the statistics, you can look at computer science. If you look at computer science graduates, the majority of computer science graduates are men. Not a lot of women take computer science. Why is it that not a lot of women take computer science as a course? I don't know. That's something that psychologists can answer. I can't answer that. I haven't done my research on that. But what I do know is that computer science is mainly popular amongst men than it is amongst women, right? And so if the majority of computer science graduates are men, that means that Activision, if Activision wants to hire developers to develop a really good game like Call of Duty, there won't be a pool big enough for women inside that computer science pool, because there's not a lot of women who actually did computer science. Therefore, if there's not a lot of women who did computer science, why should you expect Activision to have 50% of the employers or the employees women, whereas there's obviously a shortage of women in computer science? So you see, the problem is they just look at the picture, 25% women, and they just take it face value. They just take it and they just say, okay, this has to be sexism. It's clear that Activision hates women. They are against women, and therefore the government must come in and require Activision to have 50% of the employees to be women. And so if the government does that, what's going to happen to Activision? Activision's most likely going to go out of business, because there's not a pool, there's not an availability of women inside that specific industry, right? But no one is ever going to point out at nursing. No one's ever going to go to nursing and say, oh, there's a huge majority of women in nursing. Oh, there's only 5% or 2% of nurse are men, and therefore men should represent 50% of nurses. No one is ever advocating for something like that, because women are overpopulated in that industry of nursing, right? In that industry of nursing. And so it shouldn't surprise you that the majority of nurses happen to be women. If the majority of people who go to school to be a nurse happen to be women, it shouldn't surprise anyone. And there's nothing wrong with women overly representing men in nursing. Nothing's wrong with that. Okay, but someone will say, oh, nursing, it's because you need a woman's touch, and therefore, but video games, it's not about a man or woman's touch. Okay, let's think about something else. Let's think about carpenting, right? 99% of carpenters are men. Do you see any of these social justice advocates fighting for equality amongst equality in the carpeting sector or in the plumbing sector? Because 90% of plumbers are men. So is there anyone saying, oh, equality there in plumbing for these dirty jobs? No one ever vouches for equality in those dirty jobs. You see, the problem with these equity people, these people who want equity and who want diversity, they just cherry pick the industries that happen to be glorified in society, whereas they don't understand that there's economic reasons for these disparities, which have nothing to do with racism or sexism or anything like that, but has to do with economic reasons, cultural reasons as well. Like nursing, I said nursing, I made an example of nursing. Cultural reasons, it's culturally acceptable that women are very good at taking care of people. Therefore, there's a large number of nurses that are women, right? It's not that a man can't take care of people. It's just that men are not interested in doing that. Not a lot of men are interested in doing that. Yes, there are some men who are interested in nursing, but most men are definitely not interested in being nurses. So that explains, that's a cultural difference, right? So think about it. We are so culturally diverse, right? And people want equality. And this is where people get it wrong, right? Because equity is equality of outcome. That is to say that women should make the same as men. Women should be equally represented in every single industry. Everyone should be equally represented. It doesn't matter what industry it is. Everyone, there should be equality everywhere. Equality of outcome, not equality of opportunity. Because equality of opportunity is something that we should actually strive for as a society. That is a good thing, equality of opportunity. Giving everyone the same opportunity to go and study nursing, right? I think everyone has the same opportunity. I don't think anyone has unequal opportunity to study nursing. I don't think that's the case. Everyone has an equal opportunity to go and study nursing. But even though everyone has an equal opportunity to go study nursing, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get an equal outcome of nurses, right? Just the same thing as gaming and what do you call this, developers, right? In computer science, you're not going to get equal outcomes because the cultural differences are so vast, and because they're so vast, you can't just say it's sexism or something like that. And going back to my point, right, why these people are so counterintuitive when they vouch for equal outcomes, which is equity. So I'll just use I'll just use equal outcomes because I think equity confuses a lot of people. So let's say equal outcomes and diversity. So think about how this doesn't make sense, right? Let's use common sense. It doesn't need any intelligent person. It doesn't need any smart person. Use your common sense. To be diverse, to acknowledge diversity, differences in people, is to acknowledge that people are different. And because people are different, people will do different things, right? And so if you want diversity, you can't have equal outcomes, because equal outcomes means that people are equals in the sense that everything people do is the same. Men and women are the same, which is complete nonsense because men and women are not the same. As I explained, there's cultural reasons for that. But if you say we must vouch for equal outcomes, which is to say everything must be the same amongst men and women, but at the same time we should strive for diversity, that almost doesn't make sense, because diversity is to, when you have diversity, when you intuitively think about it, to have diversity is to have unequal outcomes because people are so different. I'll give you an example. If you look at the study of the Apollo mission of in America, the 28 astronauts that went to the moon, 24 of those 28 astronauts were firstborn children. 24 out of 28, so majority of those astronauts were firstborn children, right? So why is this significant, right? Because another important statistic is that the firstborns on average have a higher IQ than the other siblings, right? The firstborn has a higher IQ than his or her siblings. That is to say, obviously, there's obviously a reason for that, and that's because parents usually give more attention to the firstborn. As I think about it, you're the firstborn in the family. They want the firstborn to go to like they'll do anything to make sure the firstborn goes into university, so that when that person is done with university and gets a job, that person can then provide for his or her younger siblings, right? So there's a lot of reasons why parents give more attention to firstborn children. And so another interesting statistic is that twins have a slightly lower IQ. Like the twins it's a pair, right? Twins have a slightly lower IQ than the firstborn, right? So that doesn't make sense, but actually it does make sense, because if you happen to be a twin, right? If you happen to be a twin, right? Parents are going to give you the same attention, but it's going to be their attention is going to be divided in two. Therefore, it's different if the parent is giving attention to one child, but if it's giving attention to two children, that's a different thing. So the attention is not going to be as much as it would had it been only one child, right? So when you think about all these things, right, how can you have diversity and equal outcomes? It's basically the opposite. It's an antonym, right? Diversity, equal outcomes. You can't have equal outcomes with diversity. You cannot at all. You can literally put this to a test. It's common sense. How can you have equal outcomes with diversity? So here's the thing that people should be doing. Those who strive for diversity, who strive for companies like Activision to have more women and to have more black people. Let's say Activision had 80% of their employees are white, right? So the social justice people will come and say, hey, they must hire more black people. We want more diversity. But then again, how can you have more diversity and have equal outcomes? It is almost impossible, because you can't do that without breaking the chains of nature, without breaking the order of nature, because that's what nature is. You can't have diversity at the same time equal outcomes, because diversity means that people are not equal in the first place. People are not the same. Yes, we are equal by law, which is why we have equality before the law. It's right there in our constitution. We are equal in the eyes of the law. Yes, we are equal in the eyes of the law, and nothing's wrong with that. No one is against equality according to the law. Fine. And no one is arguing against equal opportunities. That's to say that everyone should have the same opportunity to be a basketball player. That's a good example. Think about it like this. I have the same opportunity to be a basketball player as LeBron James. LeBron James, he wasn't rich or anything, but if I have the same opportunity, just because I have the same opportunity to be a basketball player, doesn't mean that I'm going to be as great as LeBron James. LeBron James is great because he's great. He's LeBron James. I can't be LeBron James, right? Because we are different people. Humans are different. And therefore, we are going to be diverse, and because we're going to be diverse, we're going to have unequal outcomes. There's no way I'm going to make the same amount of money as LeBron James just because we had equal opportunity to play basketball. No, we can have equal opportunity to play basketball, but that doesn't mean that we're both going to be world champions. He's going to be a world champion and I'm not going to be a world champion, and that's fine because that's who we are as humans. We are diverse, we are different, right? And so if you want diversity, you should do away with equal outcomes. You should just forget about equal outcomes because it's not going to happen. By nature, it's not going to happen. If the government tries to force equal outcomes, it causes major problems, and that's something very messy. As I mentioned, if you force businesses to hire for that equal work, equal pay, businesses are just not going to hire women. Think about it. And before I end, I don't want to go for a rabbit hole, but let's talk about anti-discrimination laws, right? So anti-discrimination laws, the government says, hey, if you ever discriminate on the basis of race, sex, or any other prerequisite, you will get fined by the government, right? So that's what anti-discrimination laws mean. So over 50% of employers are small businesses. That is to say, the majority of employers are small businesses. Small businesses. So when you create a law like anti-discrimination law, think about it. If anti-discrimination law favors black people, number one, or it favors minority races like blacks, Indians, and just non-whites, because apparently white people are so bad, and apartheid and discrimination, segregation, blah, 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 blah. So these anti-discrimination laws are in favor of these disadvantaged communities, these disadvantaged groups. And so its whole reason is to help these disadvantaged groups. That's to say that businesses should not discriminate. So therefore, businesses should have equal outcomes whenever they're hiring certain people. So when businesses hire, if they hire a lot of white people, now they should stop hiring white people and they should go ahead and hire Indians, which is complete nonsense, and I'll explain why. So the law itself is forcing businesses to do away with discrimination, right? So as if in the first place, discrimination, this is something I'll talk about in a separate wild show episode. Why I would make the case for discrimination, by the way. Not racism per se, but discrimination, right? And this is what I mean. So if you put a law, an anti-discrimination law like that, that means that which heavily favors these minority groups, black people, not just black people, also black women, also women in general, not just black women, women in general, because it's the men who are making more than the women. So the anti-discrimination law has to also protect women, right? So it's not just black people and Hispanics and Asians and coloreds and blah, blah, blah. It's also helping women. Not only is it helping women, it is also helping the LGBT community, because apparently employers are discriminating against LGBT community members, right? Anyone who's gay, lesbian, blah, blah, transgender, whatever, apparently you are being discriminated against. So, fine. It's also protecting those people who have disabilities. So these are the four groups that I want to mention, and this is very important. So when you create an anti-discrimination law, what you basically say is, hey, the government is basically telling the employer that, hey, if you dare not give us the outcomes that we want, even though businesses work on profit and they have to do what's best for profit, not what's best for outcomes and not what's best for socially acceptable values. Okay, so the government says, if you discriminate against these groups, these certain groups, we will fine you, right? And so this gives the employees a lot of power to sue their employer, right? So think about it. The anti-discrimination law is right there. Now, a black woman can come in, can go to work and then suddenly say, hey, this guy, my what do you call it? My colleague is discriminating against me because I'm a woman. My colleague is for example, is treating me bad because I am a woman. She can just make up this phony claim. It doesn't even have to be true. She can just make it up. That person can just make it up and then says, I'm gonna sue you, right? Because today we live in a day of a lot of people suing people, like for no reason. People are constantly suing each other. So let's think about it. Let's think about it carefully. So if that person goes to court, right, even though the employer didn't discriminate against her, but it was a colleague, the employer is responsible for the colleague's actions or the worker's actions, the other worker who was discriminating against his or her fellow colleague, right? So the business is on the hook for the legal costs of that of that black lady suing the company, because that black lady is going to sue the company, not the employee that was discriminating her, but the company, because the company failed to regulate discrimination in the workplace. So therefore the company is on the hook. Remember, this is a small business. So a small business doesn't want to go through all these hassles. So what is the small business going to have to do? The small business is going to have to, instead of taking it to court and pay extra legal fees and go through all these lawyers and all these cases that could even take years, who knows how long they could take, and if that person ends up suing the business, it could be suing the business for hundreds of thousands, if not millions. So the small business guy is going to say, okay, let's just settle this. How much do you want? Let me settle the problem with you instead of this thing going to court. Let's settle this. And then the business pays that lady whatever amount she wants. But then again, the business is now paying unnecessary costs for nothing, right? So what does a businessman do to avoid these problems? Because there's an anti-discrimination law, the business recognizes that there's a lot of costs that come with hiring these specific groups that the government is supposed to protect. I said women, black people, I said LGBTQ and wheelchair people. So what is the business going to do? The business is going to decide not to hire these people to save a lot of money and to save a lot of legal costs in case something happens inside the workplace, right? Because you never know what's going to happen inside the workplace. You can only do so much as a small business. So let's think about this. If two people come to me and they need a job, right? Okay, I'm a small businessman, right? Doesn't matter what race I am. I'm just a small businessman, right? And so two people apply for a job post. One is black. One is this is very interesting. One is a white man, right? Which that person is not protected in these anti-discrimination laws because he's a white man, right? I mean, that's the purest form of the predators, of the evil people, if you're a white man. So one is a white man, same credentials, same everything, but the other person who's applying for the job happens to be, and listen to this very carefully, happens to be a black person, it's a woman, and that person happens to be lesbian, and on top of that, that person happens to have a disability, right? So that person is just a disaster waiting to happen. Think about that. If you hire someone like that and there's anti-discrimination lawsuits, you are risking paying thousands in the future, if not millions, because that person can make an excuse and say, okay, someone was racist against me. One of my colleagues was racist against me. Okay, there's a lawsuit. But even though the employer had nothing to do with it, that person can just file a lawsuit. But for racism, if it's not racism, it could be something else. It could be, that my colleague is sexist to me. Bow. Another lawsuit. Okay, the third thing, if it's not that, it could be that, this person is homophobic because I'm a lesbian, and this person is straight and this person is homophobic. Boom, lawsuit again. That's another lawsuit. On top of that, that person could now say, oh, these people are discriminating against me because I'm disabled. Boom. That is 4 lawsuits waiting to happen. That person is a ticking time bomb. Why on earth would you hire someone like that if there are anti-discrimination laws? But had they not been anti-discrimination laws, you wouldn't care about that because that person can't sue you or anything like that. You would just hire the person based on their merit, right? Based on what they can do for your company, based on how much money they can make you, right? Absent anti-discrimination laws. But because there are anti-discrimination laws, businesses tend not to hire these groups because they are ticking time bombs in the sense that you can be on the hook for lawsuits. Now, big companies might be willing to hire them. In fact, that's why big companies love these anti-discrimination lawsuits, because they know small businesses can't afford these lawsuits and these settlements. So therefore, most likely these small businesses are going to go out of business, and that's going to reduce competition for the big boys, right? So as it reduces competition for the big boys, you have these big boys like F&B and all these big conglomerates who are actually lobbying with politicians for these laws. They're actually lobbying for these laws because they know these laws benefit them, even though on paper it looks like it doesn't benefit them. In reality, it benefits them. So that's all I wanted to talk about regarding income disparities. So this is the last episode of The Wild Show. Thank you for listening. For those who've been listening to us all year, it's unfortunate that Sia couldn't make it. He's currently unavailable. He's been unavailable for quite a while now. So we will continue next year, January. I don't know when January will we continue with our next episode, but we will see each other soon. And thank you guys for listening. Those people who've been listening to us from day one, I really appreciate the support. Sia and I, we do appreciate the support, and we also appreciate criticism, right? If there's something, because someone was actually, I was talking about the Federal Reserve and I was talking about inflation this other day, and someone's like, nah, that's not how it works, man. That's not how it works. And the Fed is printing money, and I was saying, no, they're not printing money. And so I like that kind of criticism, because not that it's criticism, but it's someone actually voicing out their opinions which don't align with what I think. And that's a very good thing, because in today's society, these social justice advocates, I mean, they believe that they are right and nothing else could be. Everything else is wrong. We should ignore anything else. If someone like me, I mean, these things, if I was a white person, right, it would be easy to label me a racist for what I said, or to label me a sexist, right? You could easily label me a sexist because of the stuff that I said, even though what I'm saying is a fact. It's not that I'm sexist. No, I'm not. But you'd have to take my word for that. But it's not that I'm sexist. It's that I'm looking at the evidence, right? Because that's something that most people don't want to do. They don't want to look at the evidence. So it's important to look at the evidence. And it's just lazy analysis. That's the problem I have. You don't even bother to look at the evidence. You think you're looking at the evidence by looking at the gender pay gap. Oh, woman makes 70 cents. But you don't ever question why. That's the problem. Lack of questioning. And if you do question why, you get the same answer. Oh, sexism. Oh, racism. Really? Yes, that exists. But is that what's really causing the gender pay gap? You have to do more research. You have to do more digging and say, okay, if you are getting paid based on the amount of hours you work, men work more hours than women on average. Therefore, it makes sense that they get paid more. Interesting. So that means that the whole argument goes through the window. So that I don't want to go off a rabbit hole. I think I'm done. I've been talking for like 50 minutes now, and thank you for listening, guys, and have a good Christmas. Have a good Christmas. Enjoy with your family. Don't listen to me for this Christmas. I mean, yeah, just have fun and just enjoy with this Christmas, and have a New Year's. I hope 2022 has great things in store for you. Whether you agree with my views or not, that doesn't matter. I wish nothing but the best for you, and I hope you have a good holiday. Thank you so much, and we will see you in 2022.